What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Season 2 Reloaded update came with a bunch of weapon balancing changes and also some attachment balancing changes. So in today's video, I wanted to hone in on just the weapon balancing. I do think there were enough attachment changes that's better suited to a different video, because this is going to be a long enough video with just the weapon changes. So with that in mind, let's just dive right into this, and we're going to start this off with the RAAL MG. With this gun, in the patch notes, there were a bunch of damage changes stated, some increases, some decreases, and also they mentioned they increased the recoil once again on the RAAL. Keep in mind, with the Season 2 update, this one got a pretty big recoil increase already. But let's start it off with the damage changes, and as we can see here, pre-patch versus post-patch, up close, a lot of our damage values have actually increased a little bit. But at the end of the day, for core game modes with 100 health, this has no meaningful impact whatsoever. Even if you try to mess around with different combinations, this just doesn't change the number of shots to kill ever. So that change was obviously made with Warzone and DMZ in mind with armor equipped. However, at the longer ranges, you'll notice our upper torso damage and our headshot damage values have been reduced a little bit. And while this wasn't a massive change, it does change one particular scenario you might run into at 100 health for core game modes. And this is, pre-patch, all you needed for a 2-shot kill in the longer ranges was one upper torso shot combined with a headshot. Now, both of those shots will have to hit the head if you want to get a 2-shot kill. So that's a pretty isolated sort of a situation. It's not something you'll run into super often, and as a result, this wasn't a massive change by any means for core game modes. However, we also saw an increase to our recoil, and as we can see here, when we look at pre-patch versus post-patch, they increased it quite a bit more, even though, again, this was just recently nerfed. So it seems like they really want to cut the effectiveness down on the RAAL for longer ranges. Again, this is most likely targeted for Warzone and DMZ, but unfortunately, in this case, this will also very noticeably impact this gun in regular core game modes for multiplayer. But at the end of the day, this is a very predictable recoil pattern. It kicks up with a very slight lean to the right, and you will have to be aware of those gaps between each shot fired. This is definitely going to limit the RAAL in those longer ranges, even for regular core multiplayer. As for the next weapon, let's talk about the RPK a little bit, and this one just saw a couple minor changes. The first thing is our base movement speed was reduced very slightly. This will be hardly noticeable at all. It went from 4.33 meters per second down to 4.29 meters per second. And on top of that, our muzzle velocity was also very slightly reduced from 620 meters per second down to 600 meters per second. When it comes to these changes, you're not likely to notice any difference whatsoever. As for the last LMG that was impacted by this update, this is the Sakin MG38, and with this one, they stated in the patch notes that our damage ranges have been reduced. And as we can see here, when it comes to our maximum damage range, that was reduced from 35.8 meters down to about 32.5 meters, so fairly minor reduction there. However, our 3-shot kill potential range, this one was reduced from 61 meters down to 55.4 meters. So this is about a 10% reduction to our range values, and while that is somewhat noticeable, at the end of the day, the Sakin MG38 still has an incredible range profile, so I don't think this is really going to have a serious negative impact on this gun. However, on top of this, it turns out there was a hidden nerf to the Sakin MG38. I'm not too sure why this wasn't in the patch notes, because it is something they mentioned to us in a behind-the-scenes call before the update hit. It turns out they increased the horizontal recoil on the Sakin MG38 as well. And when we look at pre-patch versus post-patch, this was a fairly noticeable nerf in that area. It's going to be a bit harder to keep this gun under control with sustained fire. Next up, let's move into the SMG category, and the first thing is the MX9 got increased mid-damage ranges according to the patch notes. And it turns out both our 4-shot kill range and our 5-shot kill ranges have been increased, especially that 4-shot kill range. That's actually a very noticeable bump from 20 meters up to about 26 meters. But just keep in mind, our 3-shot kill range was untouched with this update. On a similar note, with the BAS-P, the patch notes stated an increase to our damage ranges, and with this, it turns out our 4-shot kill range was untouched. It's exactly the same pre-patch versus post-patch, but all of our other range values were increased between 15 and 18%. So definitely a noticeable improvement to those other ranges as well, and that should make the BAS-P a little bit more effective. However, there was another much needed buff to the BAS-P, and this was an increase to our sprint to fire speed. Even though the patch notes say time, which implies that it slows down, this was an increase to the sprint out speed. And basically what they did here is they now aligned this with all of the other SMGs. Previously, this had assault rifle level sprint out times. Now it's got proper SMG sprint out times, which is actually a very, very noticeable buff to this gun. And I think that was definitely needed because this was a lower tier SMG before the update, whereas now it should be a lot more solid and in line with where it should be against the other SMGs. But then let's move on to the PDSW 528. With this, there was just a slight adjustment to the alignment of the iron sights for better visibility. And as we can see here for the base iron sights pre-patch versus post-patch, you can see the front sight is sticking up just a little bit higher, and that does improve visibility very slightly. These still do block a fair amount to the center of the screen, but now you should run into fewer instances where this literally covers the entire target and you're just guessing. It's also worth noting this change applies to the GR33 light rail if you're using that attachment on this gun as well. You'll see that same sort of adjustment as with the base iron sights. Now, let's move on to the VEL-46, and with this one, they increased the close range damage ranges. So our 4-shot, 5-shot, and 6-shot kill ranges have all been improved. And this was actually quite a noticeable improvement, and I do think after this update, the VEL-46 is going to be a lot more consistent overall, because that's a pretty solid 4-shot kill range now at 13 meters. So I'm definitely looking forward to checking this gun out after the update. But another thing they did here is they made some adjustments to the 30-round magazine, which, keep in mind, is a smaller magazine than the base, so it's meant to improve our handling and mobility stats. And the patch notes just stated that they further improved the handling and mobility while using this attachment. And with this, there was definitely a very noticeable improvement to our movement speeds across the board when using the 30-round magazine. However, at least with my hand testing at 120 FPS, I was unable to measure any change whatsoever to aim down sight time or sprint out time with the 30-round mag equipped. So it doesn't appear they changed this, or if they did, it was such a small adjustment that you'll never notice any difference anyway. But then finally for the SMG category, we have the Lachmann Sub, or MP5. And with this, the first thing they mentioned is a reduction to our movement speed. And it turns out both our base movement speed and our aim walking movement speed have been reduced a little bit. However, our sprint movement speed is identical to pre-patch, so we're still sprinting around just fine. We just won't be able to walk or strafe as quickly. Additionally, in the patch notes, they stated a reduction to our aim down sight speed. And with this pre-patch, it was 196 milliseconds, and post-patch with hand testing, so there's a little bit of rounding here, it's around 210 milliseconds. So not a massive change by any means, but it is a measurable change at least. Now on top of this, they also stated that they improved recoil control on the Lachmann Sub. And when you look at pre-patch versus post-patch, honestly, it doesn't look that much different. The total vertical magnitude is definitely a bit more compressed in the post-patch recoil plot. But at the end of the day, you're not likely to notice a big difference to the recoil on the Lachmann Sub. Now, additionally, in the patch notes for the Lachmann Sub, they mentioned the LM Nebula barrel had improved damage ranges and improved recoil control, but unfortunately, this barrel doesn't actually exist. Apparently, you could see references to it in the beta build of the game. Way back in the day, there was like an icon for you to be able to unlock this barrel, but in the game's current state, this barrel simply doesn't exist. So I don't know why they put this into the patch notes. Maybe they aren't even aware that this barrel isn't currently in the game. And with that, let's now move into the shotgun category, and the first thing to cover is the KV Broadside caught a bunch of nerfs. Now with this, they mentioned a bunch of specific damage changes they've made, but they didn't lay out any numbers, and with hand testing, it's nearly impossible to get accurate damage per pellet values. So instead, it's easiest to just show you guys the range charts before and after. And as we can see, with the base version of the KV Broadside, if we're not using a different ammo type, I did notice our one-shot kill potential and our effectively guaranteed one-shot kill potential, both of those ranges were reduced very, very slightly. We're talking like 10 to 20 centimeters on this, so you're not likely to notice any difference whatsoever in the power of the base KV Broadside. And I actually think that's fine, because I do feel like the base version of this gun without any sort of ammo type is fine as it was. Having said that though, the big issue with the KV Broadside was the Dragon's Breath ammunition. And when it comes to this one, they pretty much destroyed it. Post-patch, our total damage range has been reduced down to about 17 meters now, whereas previously it was about 21 meters. Our two-shot kill potential used to be about 17 meters, now it's only 11 meters. And then our one-shot kill potential with Dragon's Breath went from about 8 meters down to about 3.5 meters. So yeah, they effectively destroyed Dragon's Breath on this, and honestly, I'm fine with that. I don't think it should have been nearly as powerful as it was pre-patch. I don't use the term overpowered too often, but this was a clear-cut case pre-patch, and I'm glad that they kept this in check. Perhaps they took it a little too far, but I'm just glad to see that we won't be seeing Dragon's Breath dominating lobbies anymore. Now finally, for the weapon changes stated in the patch notes, they did mention they increased headshot damage on all slug type ammo for shotguns. And I went in, I tested every single one of these, and it turns out for core game modes at least, there will be no measurable change here whatsoever. Our one-shot headshot potential ranges are exactly the same pre-patch versus post-patch on every single shotgun in the game. So once again, this is an update that was clearly just designed for Warzone and DMZ. You won't notice any change at all in regular multiplayer. And with that, that's finally going to wrap it up for all of the weapon balancing changes that we saw with the Season 2 Reloaded update. And I would say the biggest and most notable changes here when it comes to improvements come with the BAS-P as well as the VEL-46. Both of these should feel quite a bit better post-patch compared to pre-patch. And then on the other end of that, I would say the one that got hit the hardest would have been the RAAL MG with that recoil increase. That's definitely going to make this a lot less effective at really long ranges. And then, of course, the KV Broadside with Dragon's Breath. You really don't want to be using Dragon's Breath anymore on that shotgun. Just stick to the standard buckshot though, and you should still find a ton of success with this gun. And with that, I'm really curious to hear what you guys think about this weapon balancing update that came with Season 2 Reloaded in Modern Warfare 2. Are you guys generally happy with this weapon balancing? Are there any things that you're unhappy about? Just let me know all of those thoughts down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated, and don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.